Pues, muchísimas gracias por invitarme. Soy muy honrado de estar aquí enfrente de ustedes en esta conferencia tan importante. And I know it's an English conference, which is good for me, because although I can go fairly far with my Spanish, I'm going to be much more comfortable with this. How about that amazing work that's going on at the Fundación Paraguaya? Really something incredible. So I have a little different role today. My role is to push your thinking a little bit. And I'd like for you to participate in that. So I'm sharing the official hashtag for the NMC Horizon Project. And if you follow that tag, you will be part of a community of literally thousands of people around the world that are deeply interested in what we can do with technology. You can share your ideas with that group if you wish to contribute actively, or you can just follow along and see what's going on with it. It's also the official news channel of the NMC, so thought I would share that at the start, in case any of you like to tweet. A few months ago, I was in Spain, I guess it was July, I was in Tarragona, and I had the opportunity to visit their rare book library. I had done my talk, and the president said, you know, we have this amazing library, would you like to see it? And I said, of course, I would love to see it. And he brought me into this amazing room. The room itself, you know, was lovely wood carvings and the most elaborate bookshelves that you can imagine. But the books themselves were written in the 1400s and early 1500s. Some of them were handwritten, and some of them were from the earliest printing presses. And as I stood among those books, those treasures actually, and thought about what I was looking at, I realized this is 15th century ICT. At the time that these books were created, they were the absolute state of the art of technology. In the way that we communicate, the way that we share knowledge, the way that we distribute ideas, we're all part of that. Now, such was my summer. The next week I was in Australia, and I was in this library. And just compare the two, okay? So here's the, and then this is Macquarie University. And Macquarie University has installed a system that allows them to store their books in a completely different way and to devote the space of the library not to bookshelves, but to spaces that students can interact and work. And it's a pretty common approach in modern libraries. This particular space was about 100 meters deep and about 50 meters tall. And there's actually a tall, skinny robot there that could retrieve a book anywhere in any bin in less than 2 seconds. They had 1.5 million books there. It was really quite something to see. But it struck me how the library had changed, how it had fundamentally changed over that time. And that's what I'm here to talk about, really. One of my favorite authors is Bill Gibson. He wrote the book Neuromancer, where the term cyberspace was first used. And a few years ago, he was being interviewed by Atlantic Magazine, and they asked him, you know, how do you create your vision of the future? And admittedly, his vision is a dystopic vision. I'm very much an optimist, so there's a little difference there. But his comment really illustrates how we think about where things are going in the Horizon Project. And what he said was, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. It's just not everywhere yet. And what you need to do is you need to go look for it. You can find models on just about any idea that you want. There's a great deal of diversity under the sun. And that's the secret of the Horizon Project, which now is in its 13th year. In that time, we actually just published 3 more editions, so this slide's out of date. We published 45 editions of the Horizon Report in that time, and it's been translated more than 60 times. And we do quite a few projects under the banner of the Horizon Report. We look at higher education, we look at schools, we look at museums and libraries. And what I'm here to tell you about today is a project that we've just completed that's very exciting, and it's a project that is about schools here in Europe. And if you want, there are 200 copies of this. This is actually quite rare because this is an electronic publication. So having a really beautiful printed copy like this is a rare thing, and we have 200 of them in the back of the room, and we hope that they'll all be gone. Now, this report was a collaboration between my organization, the NMC, and an organization located right here in Seville, the Institute for Protective Technological Studies. And so, Yves Puni and your team, Pan and Reina, would you stand? Here they are. So these folks are my collaborators in this report, and I want to thank them for everything they've done. The report has had a tremendous uptake, and when we released it a few weeks ago, we measured the downloads the first day, and this was the footprint of those downloads. This is just a snapshot of 1,000 downloads that day, but as you can see, the report, even though it's a report focused on Europe, is of interest all over the world, as is most of the Horizon work, for reasons that we don't really understand, but we're really trying to live up to the expectations. Now, at the NMC, we study a lot of emerging technologies all the time. We're interested in these sorts of learning technologies, but we're also interested in consumer technologies, in digital strategies like BYOD and flipped classroom, in social media and all the different ways that plays out, the internet itself. I'm a statistician, so I'm very interested in visualization technology as well, and then a whole class of technologies that we call enabling technologies that may not actually appear as learning sorts of technologies, but are definitely going to impact it. So, for example, we're following the development of batteries, and I was just in a conversation yesterday about cell phones, and I don't know if you remember, but they used to be about this tall and about that thick, and it was because of the battery that was required. But batteries have advanced actually pretty far in that time. And 2 months ago in Japan, they announced a new form of battery which is going to revolutionize the way we think about portable power, called carbon-carbon batteries. Carbon-carbon batteries charge 22 times faster today in the lab than lithium-ion batteries. This is a little bit, maybe more than you wanted to know about batteries. And they hold 4 times the capacity in the lab. By the time they get to production, both of those numbers will likely double. Now, here's the wonderful thing about carbon-carbon batteries. They're biodegradable. Now, who wants a battery like that? All of us, right? You know, this is a great advance. So these are the kinds of things that we look at, because once we have batteries that are able to go like that, we're going to be able to think about how we use handhelds and other devices in a whole new way. Now, let me get back to the Horizon Project Europe. It was a collaboration, as I said, with IPTS and also the EC. It involved experts from all across Europe. I think we had 25 of the 28 member states represented. And to give you a snapshot of it, we looked at trends that were impacting the decisions made, the decisions that schools are going to make about technology. And we looked at those in terms of which trends are coming really fast, and which trends are slower and more constant. And so really fast trends are the growing ubiquity of social media, for example. Another fast trend, to give you an example that might be a little clearer, is the notion of Moocs. This trend came on fast, like a freight train, and then sort of settled down. It wasn't exactly a fad, because I think that it's definitely going to have some impact, but it's not impacting everyone the same way. It's really just a few players. Whereas the longer term trends, such as the evolution of online learning, which is more and more important to European schools, that's a trend that you see steady progress every year. Every year there's something new about it. And also the way that we think about data and its relationship to learning. We looked at technologies, and you can grab the book and look at it, or you can download it. It's a free report, by the way. Not only free, but remixable, which is fantastic. And so we looked at a range of technologies in it. I'm going to leave those to you to explore on your own, because that's not really the primary focus of my talk today, but I did want to mention this new work because we're in this context. One of the most important things that we've done in the European report that's new is that we began looking at technologies in a new way. For the first dozen years in the project, we really were interested in the technologies themselves. We were interested in defining them and understanding them and identifying projects related to them, but we didn't really have a framework for how the technologies might be used. We were really just interested in discovering how they were using, but not really placing that into a real framework. And so in this report, we've adopted the IPTS's Creative Classroom Research Model, which gives us a really rich way of looking at infrastructure and content and assessment and learning practices and teaching practices and all of the complex relationships that are in there. Now, this is a complex slide, but I kind of wanted to give you a picture of the technologies before I leave this topic. And in the middle are the European schools and the 12 technologies that were actually the semifinalists in the production of the report. In the right-hand column are the results of our recent global school edition. And in the left-hand column, higher education. So if you like, you have a snapshot on the two sides of the spectrum of formal learning, and then the middle close-up on Europe. There's some interesting sorts of things in here that are in common. Mobile is everywhere. That's not a surprise to anyone, I don't think. But also games and gamification. In every sector of education, the notion of gamifying and making learning more engaging is really important. But also technologies such as personalized learning, virtual and remote labs, the kinds of things that enable schools to expand their capabilities easily and cheaply. And so I encourage you to grab a copy in the back and download it, share it with your friends. We're very excited that this report is out, and I again want to thank my colleagues for all their hard work on it. Now at this point, I guess I have half of my time left, and I want to change gears a little bit and get away from the specifics of the Horizon report to sort of a larger, maybe 30,000 foot view of technology and where things are going. And to set that context, being that we're in Spain, I thought I would go back to the Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset, who in the 1930s wrote a book called The Mission of the University. And in his view, the mission of the university, and I'm making it very much simpler than it is, was these three things as they related to knowledge. So the university's role is a very important societal role, actually, and dates back more than 1,000 years to conserve knowledge. We don't want to have another Dark Ages. As society, humanity, can't afford that. And so universities have a critical role in conserving knowledge, but also in expanding knowledge and creating new knowledge. That's the research mission. And then the final of his points was that universities and schools have a very important mission to pass on that knowledge to the next generations. It's really a very simple framework, but it's profound, and it's fueled the way that we think about learning, as I say, for a long, long time. The first university that was created in the Western tradition was in Morocco, the University of Al-Qarawiyyin. It was founded in 859 by a woman, Fatima al-Fiyri. It's the oldest continuously operating degree-granting university in the world, still operates today, and still influences the way that we think about higher education in general. About 400 years later, we began to see another iteration in the way that universities went, and this was Al-Azhar University, located in Egypt. It is the second oldest surviving degree-granting institute. This one is a center for Arabic literature and Islamic learning. And these institutions studied astronomy and math and sciences as well as Islam, and really informed the development of the first Western university, which was the University of Bologna, which was famously captured in this 15th century painting of Henry of Germany visiting the university. And the university was founded in 1088. Now, to put that in context, Oxford was founded 8 years later in 1096, and the Sorbonne in 1097. So there was an explosion of universities and academic thinking about 1,000 years ago. And this is what it looked like. And I'm struck by how much it looks like today. Okay, I'm Henry. You guys are in the back, and the folks in the front row have their devices. Back in the 15th century, they were books, 15th century ICT. But further back in the room, you can see people are engaged in their own kind of separate conversations. In the very back, there's somebody that's actually asleep in the second to last row. And also in the second to last row, there's this guy checking out the girl next to him, and it looks very much like a modern sort of classroom. This is the model we've had for 1,000 years, and we've had it for 1,000 years for a good reason. We make fun of it all the time, but in fact, we've had it because it's worked for us pretty well. But in the current environment, we've begun to think about space differently, and so I want to just think about the work of another philosopher, Henri Lefebvre, who wrote about the production of space. And I've been thinking about his work a lot lately, particularly in the context of online learning environments, because I think that it applies equally as well to an online environment as it does to a physical environment. And again, greatly simplifying the work of a really deep philosopher. He saw space in terms of three things. There was a conceptual aspect to space, a perceptual aspect to space, and a lived aspect. And so the concept of this space is a general space. It can be set up like this as a theater. It can be set up for a meal. It can be set up for a banquet or a reception or an exhibition. This is a very flexible room. The perception of the space is the way that we think of the space being used. And so each of you has your own perception of this space. Does it work in this configuration? Admittedly, when you have a very flexible space, it's not perfect for any of the functions. And so the folks in the back are not necessarily able to see over the people in front of them. That's why we're on a raised platform. And then there's the last component of the lived experience. Is your chair comfortable? Do you have a place to write? We don't have the tables in this room, and sometimes you do. And all of those things work together to determine how well the space works. Now, when you think about learning, there's also a time component that Lefebvre thinks about, and has the same three dimensions: a conceptual notion of time, a perceived notion of time, and a lived notion of time. And when it comes to learning, we typically organize time into 15 or 16-week chunks, 3 hours a week. That's a typical university course. And the conception of it is that it gives you plenty of time to go into a topic deeply. The perception of it may be very different if you talk to the students, and they may feel like, it's way more time than we need, or, the course goes way too fast. It's hard to generalize about how students feel about that, but the fact is that we could easily organize courses into 8 weeks or even hours. We could have 12-hour versions of learning experiences. And how are each of those lived? Well, when we begin to move into an online space, that notion of time becomes very important, and it becomes compressed. There's an interesting sort of parallax that happens when we begin to think of learning online. People don't have the patience for looking at a screen and learning that way that they do for a live experience. And so, we may think of time as the conceptual notion of it is adequate duration, deadlines, and expectations like that. The perception of time being the pace of it all. How fast does it seem to go? Does it go by in matters of seconds or minutes, hours, days, months? How do you measure it? What's the pace? And then finally, the lived experience is, is this a synchronous experience? Am I interacting with people in real time, or is it in an asynchronous mode? Does it match with my personal rhythms? Am I a morning person, and so I'm wide awake right now? Am I an evening person and I'm a little sleepy because it's a little too early? All those things add up. The final one, I think, is probably the most important one that we need to think about when it comes to the design not only of physical spaces, but the design of online spaces. And that's what is the purpose of this space that we want to devote to learning? Because you can learn a lot of different ways. It's not always this way. This is a way that's designed to transfer learning. So you have an expert at the front and the expert transfers learning, but you can learn by practice as well. And in fact, many disciplines have practice built in as the core feature of how they do this. Or you may learn things by having the opportunities to create in a very messy kind of space that reconfigures itself all the time. Now, I've been thinking about how we can apply this kind of philosophy to what I've begun to think of as a smart learning environment, because we've now got technology that can inform these sorts of things. And so, I've come up with a short list of things. I think that our learning environments should measure learning as it happens, whether it's online, where we can use web analytics and other sorts of things, or in the classroom, where we still have to develop learning data streams and such. It shouldn't add unneeded complexity to the learning experience. It shouldn't impede it. I've already said it could be physical or virtual. An online space, why not get smarter with each use? We know how to do this, and we have lots of technologies that actually do this. I'll point out one on your phone, Siri, the virtual assistant, with access to lots of different pedagogies, frictionless access to relevant tools and analytics. That's what makes it all personal. Now, this begins to sound like a little bit of a science fiction sort of environment, but it's in fact exactly what we are able to build today, and it's going to get even better. So as I go into the last bit of my third, I guess, segment of my talk, I want to look forward to where technology is going. And I've recently read this book, The Second Machine Age, which I recommend. And it pointed out that we are celebrating now the 50th anniversary of Moore's Law. Gordon Moore was one of the co-inventors of the semiconductor and co-founder of Intel, and a really smart guy. In 1964, he wrote a book, a paper, about the phenomenon that he'd noticed that about every 18 months, the number of transistors you could put on a chip doubled, and the cost of doing that fell by 50%. And over all that time, it's been proven to continue to influence and describe what's going on with technology in all sorts of ways. Supercomputer speed, for example, or the efficiency of computers, or residential download speeds. Microprocessors, of course, is where it all started, or hard drives, their efficiency, their space capacity, all of that. All of these things can describe a relationship that in logarithmic terms looks like a line. It's a very, very clear exponential curve, actually. And the impact of 50 years of it is really something quite extraordinary. And in the book, they describe that we're poised to enter the second half of the chessboard. Now, what does that mean? Well, if we started off in the lower left, and we describe that as the beginning state, 1, and then doubled that, you know, every square across. By the time we get to 2 to the 8th, that's 1,024, 2 to the 16, 2 to the 24, 2 to the 32. By the time we get there, 32 doublings, which is where we are right now this year. That's 4.3 trillion times the capacity that our devices had in 1964. 4.3 trillion times. Now that's really remarkable, but what's even more remarkable is when we go from 2 to the 32 to 2 to the 33, that is the next 18 months. We're going to double that number. And in 18 months, we're going to be nearly 10 trillion times the capacity of what our devices could do. It's getting to the point now where the new features that some of these devices have are so extraordinary that we don't even really think of them as technology anymore. They've just become something that is something we want. You know? So virtual assistants, again, is a very good example of machine learning. Siri works because every time one of the millions of people that use it every day interact with it, the software learns from that experience, and it gets better. Only a little bit better in each interaction, but there are millions of them every day. And over the course of a year, there are hundreds of millions of them. So the point of this is that in the next few years, we really are going to see some extraordinary developments in technology and what they're able to do. And they're not going to feel like technology. They're going to feel so intuitive, so natural, so completely easy to use that we're not even going to think of them as technology anymore. And so this takes me into the closing minutes of my time here. And I'm a photographer, so this is one of my photographs. This is taken in Jackson Hole. And I like to use it as a metaphor because there's a lot going on in this photograph. To give you a sense of what might be going on in it, I took the photograph looking one direction, and then I turned around at the same moment, in the same space, and took this photograph. So all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, that looks like the daytime, and this looks like it's before the sunrise. And in fact, it was before the sunrise, but because I was shooting up towards the mountains, the sun, of course, hit those earlier, and it was a time exposure, several minutes, and so I was able to capture all the light that was in the picture. What it also doesn't tell you, though, there were 50 other photographers taking the same exact picture as well, because this is like one of the most famous places to take a picture of the American West that there is, and we all go there. And it's kind of dark, and it's kind of spooky and shadowy, and you can see the sun hasn't even really come up yet at the height of humans. What I think about when I look at that shadowy photograph is this point, that I worry that our strategic thinking, which typically looks at the mountain and the beautiful countryside and the light, is really based on a world that no longer exists. Our experience, our education, created some amazing things over time, and our world is really beautiful and complex as a result. We built these technologies like the internet that have come to become social forces in and of themselves and can change governments and stop legislation and do all sorts of amazing things. The people that come to our schools have grown up in a world where that internet has been part of their lives from the day they were born. And when they think about it, they think about it in these terms. They don't think about it as technology. They think about it as a fundamental human right. The freedom of speech, thought, assembly, expression are all tied up into this technology. And these kids are using it from their earliest moments when they can do it. This is my granddaughter a few years ago. And so the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. That's the thing. And as we end this segment of the program today, I want to encourage you to be open, to try new things, because we've got to continue learning if we want to be the leaders that we need to be. We need to take risks and be curious. Celebrate failure when it happens. And celebrate it when it happens again, and learn from it each time. Be creative, that's the main thing. And seek uncommon wisdom, because that's where vision lives. So I want to thank you very, very much for your time this morning. You're the folks that are going to make this future happen, and I know you can do a good job at it. Thank you very much.